this is one of those topics which I think some of you may be more qualified than myself in terms of presenting. I try in my own way to keep up with what is happening in terms of, because as an imam, you have to keep abreast with what is the current things happening in the world. And I have some idea in terms of what Muslims need to do in terms of their responsibilities towards the planet. This issue of climate change, it's expressed in many different phrases: climate change, global warming, greenhouse gases issue. There are many dimensions of how people represent them. This issue of climate change was first mainly started and advocated, I think, very early back by Al Gore, in which he made a movie called An Inconvenient Truth. He actually, before that movie, used to travel all over the world and try to present PowerPoint presentations, alerting leaders and people in charge of countries and corporations about this issue of climate change. And then there's a little girl in Switzerland her name is Greta Thunberg, who became worldwide fame because of, she called out leaders. She actually started so small. Every Friday, she would skip school and she would go and sit down in front of the parliament building in her country and protest and try to get her leaders to advocate for climate change. And then she was able to speak to the leaders of the United Nations and became very famous in terms of being an advocate for climate change. I think she also took a boat or something like that from Switzerland to New York, refusing to fly on the plane because of trying to advocate for cost in terms of using all of these heavy intensive petroleum pollutants that destroy the planet. So we will look at several things regarding climate change. I'm hoping that by the end of the session that we would at least have some knowledge of this and that we would get to understand why we as Muslims have to become the biggest advocates for this area. I have actually a niece who is very, very active and proactive in this area. And she advocates for this very much. She's in different organizations and does a lot of work in terms of this particular area. So first we want to define what do we mean by climate change? And it refers to really the long-term shift in temperatures and weather patterns. Temperature and weathers are already changing, but this one is changing in a way that there's a long-term consequence. That's one of the definition, the simple definition that they refer to. And it happens when the Earth's climate adjusts and displays new weather patterns. And these weather patterns are pretty permanent and they last for a long time. It's usual, sometimes you will get, we expect snow in November, some year you wouldn't get this, but these changes I'm talking about drastic changes that happen and they remain permanent year after year after year after year. And the speed at which these changes happening is what they call climate emergency. Now, what is the cause of climate change generally? One of the causes, of several causes, creates that. When you have volcanic eruptions or meteors striking the Earth, that affects the climate. But the main issue really that has come to the fore is the enormous amount of carbon dioxide that we are releasing into the atmosphere. That is so much that it has begun to affect human activities. The 1915 Oxfam report shows that 50% of global emissions are being produced by only 10% of the people. And so it's a small amount of people that is creating a large amount of damage. And the culprits are really the wealthy nations. Unfortunately, the effects are felt by the poorer nations because they don't have the wealth or the capacity to mitigate what happens to them. And the wealthy countries, United States, Canada, Australia, they are the ones that are producing all these highly carbon intensive lifestyles. And then in effect, it affects the poor countries who has not contributed to this, but are bearing the brunt of the harm that comes from it. And then the insane desire and mad rush to eat meat have exploded the agriculture and the animal industry to get cows, and almost 65% of the gases that get emitted from the animals actually is what creates, a huge problem of greenhouse gas emitted from the cows, and so we have been producing. In the old days, you had a farmer, you have a couple of animals, and that's it. Now we are manufacturing them because we have this insatiable desire to eat meat so much that there's a mad scramble to rear cows and animals like this, and that in turn has an effect on the atmosphere. So those are some of the causes that create this climate change. Now we're going to learn much more about it. Now, first of all, we want to see some of the effects of this climate change. Just want to see where we're explaining this. So as a caveat to the beginning of understanding this issue, so let me say to you that really what happened is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala designed the earth, he has some gases that sits on top of the earth. And so when the sun shines and comes down, some of the sun's rays get absorbed by the earth, and some of it bounces back into space. And that bouncing back and absorption, it bounces back, it passes through some of those gases, and it helps to regulate the temperature to the maximum benefit for us. Now, what is happening is that because of the huge gas we are producing, carbon dioxide, it goes up and forms a bigger, thicker surface on top. So when the sun's rays come down and to reflect back up, it is not going back into space. It's actually getting trapped above in the atmosphere, and that in turn comes right back down and starts to heat the planet up, and making it warm. So the global temperature keeps rising from year to year. And in the last 9 out of 10 warmest years that have been recorded has occurred within the last 15 years. So this is really very, very serious. And that if you notice from 2005, 2009, 10, it is only within the last 15 years we have found on record that 9 out of 10 of these are the warmest in terms of how the globe has been having this global warming. So in 2019, 2016 was the highest. And it just keeps going. It's not, this trend that the planet is getting warmer and warmer. The second thing we see that indicates to us is that the oceans are getting warm. You see, the oceans usually absorb a lot of the heat from the sun. They absorb almost 93% of the heat generated by these gases, greenhouse effect. But now, with the heat being trapped and returned back, the temperature in the ocean is beginning to rise. And now when you have that, like 1.3 degrees Celsius, they're rising, that in turn creates huge problems, because when water is heated, it expands, and that creates further problems. So that's another sign that we're noticing, that the oceans are getting warmer, and they give rise to many different things which we'll talk about. Shrinking ice sheets as a natural corollary of the warm earth getting warmed up, it is beginning now to melt. Those glaciers and those huge ice sheets that cover places like Greenland, and we are seeing, instead of the natural way in which they would freeze up back, now they are melting at a rate faster than they are able to recover to freeze back. And so we're slowly seeing the melting of these ice sheets. And when they melt, of course, they go into the ocean. The glaciers, people used to go and admire them, and they remain there for many, many years. They are shrinking and disappearing. You have the Tibetan plateau in the Himalayas, which have the densest concentration of glaciers outside the polar regions. They're losing ice fast. And in the glaciers in Garhwal, Himalaya in India are retreating so quickly that researchers believe that by the year 2035, those glaciers would actually be disappearing. And when the glaciers melt, what they do, they of course become rivers, and then they begin to flow downstream. They affect water, they create floods, they become a source of problem for millions of people. And then you have this snow cover, which the snow cover that covers the earth usually functions to also reflect the sun. When the sun comes, part of how it gets reflected back up is this snow cover, they call it the albedo effect. And that the sun comes, it reflects back out and it helps to get rid of some of that heat. Now, when that starts to melt, then you cannot have any reflection anymore. And so the heat gets absorbed. And they are noticing that that snow effect, which used to absorb almost 90% of the sun's energy, is now declining as well. And of course, when these things melt, the ocean's level begin to rise. So the oceans have been rising at a rate of 3.3 millimeters every year. And when the oceans rise, places like Guyana and the Caribbean islands, and even in Miami and places which are coastal tongues, they will end up having the effect because more and more the sea is going to invade into these cities and affect millions of people. So once the oceans start to rise, I've seen myself in Guyana, on the East Coast, they had that sea wall that protects the city of the tongue of Guyana. But more and more you're seeing the huge waves that are bouncing up over that wall, and they will have to probably consider raising that seawall a little bit more, because when they have high tide, it's just flooding the whole road. It's coming over. You're actually physically seeing it. Then there is declining Arctic sea ice, which again, it's roughly been declining by almost 10% in the last 30 years. And when you have warming weather, then it creates many other things. For example, you have extreme events happening. You have fires in California and Australia, changing temperatures in the Indian Ocean, created a perfect storm for locusts. And they had this huge invasion of locusts in East Africa and the Middle East, in which thousands, hundreds of thousands of locusts invade, eating out all the people's crops, creating problem again for food insecurity. In the Bay of Bengal, you also have super cyclone that came through. The Amphan had killed hundreds of people, caused widespread flooding. In Puerto Rico, we get to witness close by what that hurricane did. Hurricane Maria 3 years ago devastated the island. And so that will give rise to more and more of those events as the oceans and the planet begin to warm up. Now, also what happens is that the carbon dioxide that is gets absorbed by the oceans, the world's oceans. And so that creates the ocean to become more acidic. And when the ocean becomes acidic, of course, it has a direct impact on calcification process for animals like snails and oysters and crabs. They rely on the ocean to build shells and skeletons for themselves. And if the ocean is too acidic, it will melt them. And so it will create a huge problem for these inhabitants of the ocean. And this thing is moving at a faster rate than the last 300 million years, they say. So those are some of the signs the scientists are seeing and are alerting humanity about this reality. Now, some of the countries that are directly the top 10 countries that have been affected so far the most. Japan had many issues dealing with it. There was heavy rainfall that was twice as much, that become the wettest day in the country. They were hit with this rainfall, flash floods, mudslides. They damaged about 5,000 homes. Almost 2.3 million people had to evacuate. Then they had a heat wave in August 2018, in which severe heat led to almost 70,000 people being hospitalized. And then they had a typhoon following, called Typhoon Jebi, that became a very intense, was the most intense cyclone that they've had in the last 25 years. And so that typhoon damaged almost $13 billion of Japan's economy. Then you had the Philippines. You know, they had the Typhoon Mangkhut. They plowed through the Philippines with speeds up to 270 kilometers an hour, and left literally 250,000 people devastated. Then you had Germany, which is a strange place for climate change to happen, but in April and July of 2018, Germany recorded the hottest year ever. And the heat wave killed 1,000 people. Then they had heavy rainfall. And so almost 8,000 farmers had to sanction the call because it affected the soil. They had drought. Almost $1.8 billion were lost in terms of trying to fix those things. Madagascar, which is this exotic island. They were hit by Cyclone Eva. So all of these are new phenomenons that happening that never happened for 200, 300, 400 years. People grew up having the same weather, and now they're having issues. That Cyclone Eva came in at 180 miles per hour, and they just literally almost 15,000 people were affected. They had displacements of 6,300 people, and the 70,000 people had to become refugees in Madagascar. In India, the monsoon rain, which they expect from June to September normally, had a tremendous flooding. They had Cyclone Titli and Gaja also hit them, and they had many issues in terms of happening in India. Sri Lanka also had severe monsoon rains, which affected so many of their people. And so almost 170,000 people were displaced in Sri Lanka as a result of this. And then you had Kenya, this African country. The seasonal rains that they normally get became twice as normal. And so their whole main central rivers were flooded, affecting almost 40 out of 47 counties and causing the death and displacing of almost 300,000 people. In Rwanda, heavy rains again caused flooding. Almost 5,000 homes were affected. 25,000 people were left without homes. And that flood created cholera, mosquito-borne chikungunya virus, which caused fever and joint pains, came as a result. Canada also experienced extreme cold temperatures. 4,000 people were displaced because of flooding as well. In British Columbia, heavy snowpacks melted with record speed, causing rivers to overflow. And there were also 2,000 wildfires throughout the region that caused smoke-filled skies in West Canada, making the air quality among the worst in the world during that time. And then the Fiji Islands, they suffered the effect of 3 cyclones, $1 million in damage, 2,000 people displaced, 900,000 people had to leave their homes. And so we are witnessing before our eyes the slow onslaught of the effects of climate change. And it's so ironic in that for many of us, as long as we have food on the table and tomorrow looks good for us, many of us don't really think about it until it actually becomes a reality in our home. If you go to Miami, you will see some of the flooding that happens already when they have high tide. So they have also tried to predict, based on what they've seen so far, the scientists have predicted that what is going to happen in the future if humanity does not collectively do something, it's going to be really bad. They have forecasted that temperatures will continue to rise and get even hotter. This will disrupt plants because it causes the season, the rainy season becomes shorter or longer. And so the animals get confused. Those who have to hibernate and migrate, birds and insects, their habitat gets disrupted. And when they are disrupted, they affect us as well. You will find precipitation patterns where we expect rain at a certain amount of time of the year. You won't get any rain, so a lot of places will become deserts. And then you will have other times of the year when you expect no rain, and then it comes in huge gallons and flood your area. So you'll have these two extremes happening, they said. More droughts and heat waves are coming. Hurricanes, they say, will become much more intense, and they will increase almost like 40%. Of category 3 or more hurricanes will be coming, because as the oceans get warm, they give rise to more hurricanes. And of course, the sea level that is rising every day will affect over 190 million people. And the Arctic likely will become ice-free, which is an extraordinary thing to even fathom. And so those are the reality of climate change. And so humanity have recognize this, certainly the scientists and those involved in the field are panicking and trying to appeal to humanity. Hey, this is our planet. This is not politics. This is not a country. This is not, this is something in which all of us, the whole planet, could be destroyed. That life as we know it on Earth could be cease to exist and become uninhabitable if we don't do something about this. Nature has a way of slowly informing us before it actually comes and hit us and smack us in the face. And so it gives us small warnings. Hey, you need to do something about this before the real avalanche comes on you. And so what, as a global species, what are we doing? So there's some efforts that are being made. Number one, carbon mitigation efforts are starting, and that means that to try to control the carbon dioxide emission that takes place through cars and jets and all the different kinds of technology we use that emits these things. A lot of effort is now being made to help some of the poorest countries because they get impacted the most, as we mentioned before. And so there's an effort to try to mitigate that. And then there's a focus on the 1%ers, because the 1% of income earners, they leave a carbon footprint 175 times higher than low-income people. And so there's an effort to try to focus and educate the 1% income earners about trying to live a more responsible lifestyle and trying to reduce the carbon footprint that they are leaving. There's discussion regarding taxing the use of gasoline, to tax industrial polluters, to end government subsidies of fossil companies. In other words, generally to convince humanity to stop using all of these heavy carbon, at least a heavy carbon pollutant or footprint, and to try to get people to start to think of other ways in which they can exist with technology without leaving such large carbon footprint. And so there's a huge push for green technology such as wind and solar and geothermal energy, which are viable alternatives to fossil fuels. But initially, you will have to use fossil fuels to bring up these technologies. But there's an idea that hopefully when they do perfect these technologies, it will tremendously reduce these gases and help to contribute to bringing the planet back to some level of normalcy. And so all the countries, they got together, 179 countries, what is called the Paris Agreement. This got publicized during the Trump administration because he pulled out of it. And that created a huge problem because the United States was the most important member of this. since they are one of the largest polluters on the planet, you need their involvement of the companies and so on. And so 179 countries on the EU, they spent 2 weeks in Paris in 2015, and they hammered out an agreement that all over the world, we will try to keep the global temperature increase below 2 degrees Celsius, and if possible, 1.5 degrees Celsius. It was one of the largest gatherings that the world leaders have ever seen. Everyone who attended pledged to work with their country to cut emission. And so they call it INDC, Intended Nationally Determined Contributions, that each country will make an intention to cut from their country to work on this area. The United States at that summit pledged to cut the US climate pollution by 28%. China pledged to cut carbon intensity by 65% by the year 2030. The EU plans to cut emissions by 40% by the year 2030. And so the Paris Agreement, which was agreed on in 2016, 55 countries representing 55% of global emissions, they left with this joint agreement that the world, for the first time, will collectively in each of their countries work towards making this a reality. Now, the Muslims also, the Muslim countries, also met at a historic meeting as a way to prepare for that Paris meeting. And they called on the world's 1.6 billion Muslims to do their part to eliminate the dangerous greenhouse gas emissions and commit to renewable energy sources. So arising out of that symposium, which was held in Istanbul in 2015 in August, they produced a document, which you can go online and see, detailing out all the issues in terms of vis-a-vis what Islam says and appealing to Muslims to get involved and to become part of the solution to this issue. Part of the declaration, I just want to mention a couple of them, began by telling us Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the universe with all its diversity, richness, and vitality, and that this planet existed for billions of years, and climate change is not something new. That the pace of global climate change today is of a different order of magnitude from the gradual changes which we saw in the past, and that it is human-induced, and we have now become a force that is dominating nature, taking over the natural order of things because of the human activity. And reminding ourselves that Allah has made humanity to be a caretaker, a khalifatu fil ard, that we are stewards of Allah for the earth. And now we have become the cause of corruption and devastation instead of being good stewards of the earth. You know, the current rate of climate change cannot be sustained. And so the earth's equilibrium, which is called Mizan in our book, may not be lost, because Allah created the world and the earth with balance, you know, so that He created everything. He has perfected everything He has created. So Allah has put perfection in the creation of humanity and the earth. And so everything that He created with bilhaq, with value. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by His mercy, have given us fertile land, fresh air, clean water, all the good things of the earth to make our lives viable and delightful on the face of the earth. And that the earth functions in a natural seasonal rhythm and cycle, the climate in which living beings, including humans, thrive. So Allah has designed where such an amazing system in that you have the clouds will absorb water from a particular place, become clouds, and then move and float and go to another part of the earth and drop that water. And in this way, it distributes water throughout the earth. You know, and the system is designed in such a beautiful way, the tides and the oceans and everything in perfect balance. But this balance is becoming disrupted And so we have got to be able to get back to it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Rahman mentioned, وَالسَّمَاءَ رَفَعَهَا وَوَضَعَ الْمِيزَانَ أَلَّا تَطَغُوا فِي الْمِيزَانِ وَأَقِيمُوا الْوَزْنَ بِالْقِسْطِ وَلَا تُخْسِرُوا الْمِيزَانَ وَالْأَرْضَ وَضَعَهَا لِلْأَنَامِ. That it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He raised up the heaven and have set the balance, the mizan, that you may not transgress in the balance, but weigh things equitably and skimp not in the balance Allah has set up for all beings. And then he mentions also evil has become rife on the land and at sea because of the deeds of humanity. This in order that you may cause them to taste some of their deeds, perhaps they will turn back. So Allah says, I'm going to cause you to taste some of the consequences of the corruption and evil that you do on land and at sea. Allah is going to cause that to have consequences for you, and it will yield to become a very difficult thing for you. People ask, why does God punish us? Well, as part of it is our own hands have wrought these things and bring these consequences. And so we are also told, and as part of this declaration, they also mention that we are one of multitudes of living beings. And the planet, we share it with species and thousands and hundreds of thousands of species all exist on this planet. The jinns, the humans, the insects, the animals, they all live on this one planet, and it's incredible and extraordinary to see how so many variety of different species can coexist on one planet. You have the ocean that have so many different species, and jungles and deserts, and Allah has made it where everybody can coexist despite having different needs. The fish needs water, the human needs air, and Allah has created this beautiful balance and perfection that we are now tampering with and creating a planet that is going to become a danger for all of us. And we have no right to live our lives in such a way that it becomes an oppression for the rest of creation. Allah has made humanity the leader, and so it is our responsibility. The animals are to thrive. It becomes the responsibility of human beings to make sure animals are taken care of, to make sure those plants grow, to make sure that insect and those fishes thrive. It is our responsibility. We have been made the Khalifatul Ard, not any of the other animals. And so it has become man's responsibility to make sure that the future of this planet will be in the way we operate. And so we have got to be cognizant of that. Now, the Prophet ﷺ, as far as his example goes, we know that the Prophet ﷺ declared and protected the rights of all living things. And he outlawed customs of burying infant girls, prohibiting the killing of living things just for sport. In our religion, you just can't shoot animals because you're having fun. You just take a scatter shot and you kill a whole bunch of ducks because you need to eat 2 ducks. We're only allowed to hunt what we eat. And he has guided his companions. They used to conserve water when we're making wudu. You can't just waste water in washing for prayer. He forbid us from felling trees, just cutting down trees in the desert. Then he saw a man who was taking something from a nest of a bird, and he tell him, hey, you need to return back because the mother will come and looking for her young. He forbid a man who tried to burn an anthill. He says, no, put out the fire. We're not allowed to do. We have to be able to live in a way that we are facilitating the living beings of all. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ's practice was. He also demonstrated kindness and care and general good principles of treatment to animals, which formed the bedrock. He outlawed killing animals for sport, told people not to overload their camels and donkeys, and commanded that slaughtering an animal for food be done with kindness. We have to sharpen the knife. We have to make sure when you're killing an animal, you don't let the other animals see. We have consideration for the animal's feeling and respect for Allah who gave their life. We have to say Bismillah, Allahu Akbar before we kill them, acknowledging that it's only with the permission of Allah we are allowed to kill this animal for our food. So he established around Mecca and Medina certain zones in which there are native plants, you can't touch them. There are certain wild animals, you can't hunt them. So he made inviolable zones where people could not touch. He established protected areas for conservation and sustainable use of the rangelands and plants and wildlife. And the Prophet ﷺ himself demonstrated how we need to live on the planet. A very frugal life, free of excess, and ostentation, not this mad rush to acquire so much and half of it we don't use. The Prophet himself renewed and recycled, because when he had clothing, they would repair them. They don't just toss them when they have a tear in their garment. They would repair them, or if he doesn't need it anymore, he would give it away for somebody else to use. He ate very simple, healthy food, which occasionally had meat. And he took delight in enjoying the dunya as is. As in the words of Quran, living a life of mercy. And so this is the example that we have from our Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, in which we are asked to live our lives in the dunya in such a way that we leave the dunya for the future generation to come. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned us in the dunya hulwa wa khatira, that the life of the world will appear green and sweet. Allah has made it like that. And that Allah makes you generations succeeding one another, that you may try, that He may try you with respect to your actions, how you treat it. In Surah Al-Kahf, Allah says, Inna ja'alna ma'ala al-ardi zinatan laha linnabluwahum ayyuhum ahsanu amala. That Allah says, and we have made on the earth, we have made whatever is on the earth as a beautification for you, in order to try you to see whether you will do right by it. In other words, it's a test. Allah has made this earth so beautiful for us, facilitating all of our needs, in order to test us to see how we will deal with it. And so from a position of Islam, we have got to understand and approach our stay on the planet in a way that we are facilitating a next generation to come and enjoy it as well. We should not be in the lifestyle of just wasting and grabbing and trying to accumulate and accumulate and accumulate. The fourth biggest business in this country is storage. People don't have enough storage for the stuff they gather. Ask every household, you will find, do you think you have a storage problem? Can you do with some more space? Oh, every single one will say yes. They have a house of 5, 6 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, and still they don't have space. The garages are packed to the brim with stuff which you will never use for the rest of your life. We just keep acquiring and we don't get rid of them. We develop an emotional attachment to things, and so we find it difficult to part company with them. We have to paint a little wall, we buy a gallon paint, and we're left with 3/4 gallon when it's done. And then it sits there in the garage until it gets, it has to be given away by the people who will give it away after we pass away. We don't get rid of stuff. And so, as Muslims, we've got to become more conscious of all of this. This is part of the lifestyle of Islam, that we're supposed to live simple, frugal, taking from the dunya, as the Prophet says, kun fi dunya ka annaka ghariba abiru sabil, as if you're passing through, just taking enough to get by. Because your journey is not here, it is going on to another place. We're heading on our way to Jannah. We're not planning to stay here. So don't live as if you're planning to live here forever. Try to do that. And so, what is it that we can do as Muslims, as an individual Muslim, and maybe as a community as well? So here are a couple of things that we would encourage all of us to start doing. Number one is to try to do more walking. If you find you're close to a masjid, or you try to walk regularly as much as you can. I used to encourage the young people in Ramadan, that they should park at the farthest distance possible, so that the older people could get the spaces for the cars and help them to be able to park closer to the masjid. And if you're young, park far away, so you can walk to the distance from the parking lot to the masjid, because you're young. So even if you come early and you see the close distances are empty, don't park there. Go to the farthest distance and then park, because it's an act of kindness. Let the older folks get that spot. But learn to practice walking some more. You have people, they live 1 mile from the gym, and so they will drive to the gym 1 mile, and then they go on a treadmill and work out with 1 mile of walking in the treadmill instead of walking to the gym. We become so conditioned to forget about walking or bicycling. which is a lost art. And then try to carpool as much as you can so we can save on, because passenger vehicles, they're a huge emitter of carbon dioxide. Each car roughly emits 4.6 tons of carbon dioxide every year. So the fewer cars you have on the road, the earth will breathe a little easy. So whenever you can, try to carpool and don't have the need to go driving your car every time, when you have an opportunity to do that. Number 3 is to try to begin to reduce our plastic consumption, because sunlight and heat cause plastic to release greenhouse gases, which we know increase the temperature of the earth and accelerates that climate shift. So a few effortless things we can do is walk with your own reusable coffee cup and water bottle. Don't have to just buy, bottled water that you're throwing away the plastic containers every time. Get a permanent cup that you drink water, a permanent water bottle, buy a nice one for yourself and use that, fill up your water. You go to the grocery stores. I have to quote my mom, because my mom, I take her to the grocery. She has like about 10 bags she made herself, bags within bags within bags of cloth bags. And she will not take anything in terms of plastic bags from the grocery store. She will fill these into these bags that you have. And sometimes I said, why don't take the plastic? No, she packs them in her bag and then we take it. And she reuses that. So got to think more in terms of this insatiable desire to keep using plastic. And if you become a little more conscious of this, you'll find slowly you'll become, when you go to buy straw, don't buy a plastic straw, utensils and different things. And now, alhamdulillah, there are many companies that are producing beautiful alternatives to plastic. So you just have to do a little bit of research and you could slowly develop a lifestyle of not necessarily no plastic, but at least minimal plastic in terms of your life. Then we need to stop littering, and to start recycling, separate your recyclables from non-recyclables, see it as a responsibility. It's a pain in the butt to recycle, but you've got to understand that when you do that, you're making it easier for whoever it is that is going to recycle these materials. So when you litter, the oceans are filled with litter right now. There are companies now trying to clean up the oceans. But when you litter, you cause the air, the soil, the water pollution. It endangers the animals, and on land and in sea, because they get trapped into nets and different things that you throw away. So we should avoid littering and throwing things all over the place. Always find a covered bin to do that. And then in terms of spending our money, we should support supermarkets and restaurants and other establishments. We know they are making an effort to become green. We should support those kind of businesses. So when we're going to spend our money, let our money have a maximum impact. So I'm going to go to the restaurant that I know is conscious of this and wants to do the right by it. Some people actually recommend that we should boycott those that don't. But it's a progression. Start by trying to support at least those companies that are involved in doing this. And then individually, we have to become more energy efficient in our homes, trying to get the bulbs and all the stuff that, have a little discipline to switching off your lights, your TV consoles, lowering the washing machine temperature and all of that stuff helps a lot. These little things which we say, but it's not going to cost. But if a lot of people do it, it creates a tremendous impact. We now have a lot of gadgets that will turn off itself. So when you left on the light, you forget to turn it off. It just turns off itself. Most of the hotels in Malaysia I've been to see, they have, in those places, they have a lot of technology that conserve energy. And then when you're going to give your charity, try to give it to causes that also promote this idea of being conscious of the planet. Lastly, we need to, this issue of climate change, it is being championed by the young people all over the world. I quoted Greta Thunberg, who was 18 years of age, and she has created a worldwide movement, and they advocate for climate change, that governments need to do more. But the young people, because this is their planet to inherit. And so more than the old people are basically, we already lived our life. We don't really care too much. The planet is not going to be destroyed within the next 20 years, and I'm not going to be wrong anyway. So for the old people, it's more blasé, I don't care. But it is the young people who are championing this cause, rightly so, to recognize and to see that the planet they want to live and inherit, that is kept and protected. And so they are the loudest voices in terms of this issue. And we should, as Muslims, create little environmental climate change clubs in our masjid and encourage the youth to become advocates for this, to educate people about it, and to also try as much as they can to harass public officials to pay attention to it by writing them letters and to become more conscious of it. So as Muslims, this is not an issue that we can just sit back and just feel comfortable with. Allah has charged us to take care of the planet. And so may Allah help us to be able to be good stewards of the planet and to live lives that we'll be proud of, that when we leave, we did right by it. And may Allah help all of us to become involved in some way or the other to help with this process. Masjids need to do a lot more in terms of Ramadan is coming, instead of having that water bottle, plastic bottles all the time, maybe have a cooler in which people can get paper cups and take from it. We've got to think of creative ways of saving on this. There are quite a few masjids now that are using regular plates, like in California, rather than disposable plastic plates. They actually bought plates. They have a dishwasher that washes it, and they conserve, so. And then there are other masjids that are building in such a way to minimize the use of energy, as in Hawaii and different places, which when they're thinking of building the masjid, they're trying to figure out how to make it green, energy efficient, inshallah. So it's starting with education, then developing a mentality, and then becoming a lifestyle. If all of us do our part, hopefully we can bring down this emission and, create back a planet that we would be proud of. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.